Hello to everyone joining us. We'll just wait a few more minutes and let a few others start entering the webinar, and then we'll make the start. Okay, good evening everyone. We might make a start now. Thank you for joining us for our Stock Sense Stock In, Stock Out webinar tonight. My name is Tegan Brammer and I'm the Project Manager for Stock Sense. If you haven't heard of Stock Sense before, we are a project which is funded by the Cattle Compensation Fund and the Sheep and Goat Compensation Fund and run through the Victorian Farmers Federation. So our main aim is to help Victorian livestock producers improve their livestock health and welfare, and in particular their biosecurity practices on farm. We run a number of workshops across the state throughout the year on a range of different topics which are relevant to each region that we go to. We also have a number of webinars and resources on our website which you can download. Some upcoming events while we're here. We've got a workshop in Bendigo on the 9th of February, and we also have a peri-urban webinar series which will run through the essentials of starting up your own farm, which will be a 6-week series starting on the 14th of February. And our first field day for the year will be at Farm World in March. At the end of the webinar, we will have a survey pop up, and you'll also receive an email with a link to this survey. It's really important, and we would really appreciate it if you fill that out for us so we can keep on improving how we run these events. These are just some contact details. If you have any questions or any further feedback, feel free to email us. Our website has all the resources that you can find on there, and we're also on social media. So tonight we're lucky to have Elizabeth Bradley from Integrity Systems. Elizabeth is the Manager of Quality Policy and Compliance with Integrity Systems Company and oversees the Livestock Production Assurance Program, the NLIS, Animal Identification Approvals, and is charged with implementing improvements for both. She's also worked as an auditor with the federal government, so she's well experienced and knows firsthand about Australia's biosecurity and export legislation and policies, and she has a passion for the industry and helping to improve Australia's red meat integrity system. So Elizabeth's going to speak on the intricacies of traceability and biosecurity in Australia, and explore the role of property identification codes, as well as the National Livestock Identification System and how electronic identification tags work. She'll also talk a bit about the LPA program and electronic national vendor declarations. So you can hopefully learn some practical solutions to protecting not only your animals and those of your neighbours, but also the wider agricultural industry as a whole. So I will stop sharing my screen now and pass it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks, Tegan. Just give me a second to pull my screen up. All righty, should be sharing away now. So welcome everyone. Yes, so tonight or this afternoon, depending where you are, I'm going to take you through just an overview of Integrity Systems Company and where we fit within the industry, just to give you some background. Also, we'll talk about the the National Livestock Identification System, also known as the NLIS, and the components of that system, which is property identification codes, electronic identification, recording livestock movements in the NLIS database, and then a little bit to tie it all together around why traceability is so important for biosecurity. I'll also talk around the Livestock Production Assurance Program and why that's so important to the red meat industry, as well as national vendor declarations and the electronic system for doing those as well. So ask any questions you like as well, so we can answer them for you at the end. So to start off with, just to give you a bit of a framework in terms of where ISC or Integrity Systems Company sits, we do love our acronyms, so bear with me. We're a fully owned subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia, who provide the research, development, communication services to the red meat industry. MLAs are funded through levies that the federal government gives us and guided on the strategy side about what we need to be doing by you, the producers, in terms of the peak industry councils that represent sheep, goats, cattle, grass-fed and grain-fed. So that's sort of how we fit. The state farming organisations obviously feed into the national peak bodies there, and there's a lot of collaboration across the whole chain. It always helps to know where we fit into things. So tonight I'm talking about the integrity system as a whole. So we basically have the integrity system for the red meat industry, which provides that assurance when we're exporting our meat or consuming it domestically, that it's safe to eat, that it's quality, and that we've got that traceability in case something does go wrong. It actually underpins a lot of our trade agreements we have with overseas countries, and it gives them confidence we're doing the right checks and verifications to support those export markets as well. So it's a really big industry. I think the last statistic was $31 billion in Australia was generated from red meat. It's a lot of jobs. And it's really important that we get it right. And the other part of why traceability is so very important, and the critical reason why NLIS was started in the first place, was around biosecurity in response to emergency animal diseases. So I know the topical one of the last few years has been foot and mouth disease with the detections in Indonesia. So if we have an outbreak of these diseases, no, we don't have them at the moment, and hopefully we don't get them. We need to be able to trace where infected animals are, where they've been, and then what other animals might have come into contact with them really, really quickly. So if we can't do that, the disease is spreading unchecked, and potentially we're having to destroy more and more of our animals. And also we've had to have livestock standing still, so nothing's getting processed. We've got welfare concerns backing up, and all of our market access to export our red meat overseas evaporates overnight. So really, really important around traceability and biosecurity, as it links directly to producers' livelihoods. So the integrity system is what we term it when we pull it all together, which includes the Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA, and the National Livestock Identification System, or the NLIS. So LPA looks at the on-farm assurance, so what the producers are doing on farm with the animals, and the NLIS is the legislated part underneath state and territory legislation around property identification, animal identification, and movement recording. So both of these together can contain or make up the integrity system, and they work in together with each other. So LPA eNVDs are a livestock movement record that's required by law when moving livestock, and that can also be recorded in the NLIS system, and you can get those through being accredited with the LPA program. So you can see they all interlink together really quite nicely. So to start off with, we'll talk around the livestock identification system and what that contains. So as I mentioned before, we've got three sort of pillars that make up the system. The first being livestock identification, So identifying our livestock with tags, so EIDs. We've also got identifying locations, so that's property identification codes or PICs. And so that applies to basically any location in Australia where a livestock might be at any one point in time. The third element, which is around that movement recording, so using the database to record the movements when they move on and off properties. So those three things work together as the three foundational pillars of traceability, and that's across any type of commodity that you're tracing. You need to be able to identify the commodity, so livestock, the location of where they are, and then some way to trace their movements. So we'll jump into the first sort of foundation, which is property identification code. So PICs, as I'll shorten them up, is an 8-character code that gets allocated by, in Victoria, Agriculture Victoria, for the parcel of land on which you're operating. And so you have to talk to your state department about getting a PIC, or if you need to edit your PIC or change the details on it, you have to talk to the state department. PICs are really important because they start that location movement, so we know what's where at any one point in time. They also are really important because you use them in LPA to accredit a PIC, to say that this PIC is being controlled by this person. So PICs are really important for both LPA and NLIS. Other cool things I think that PICs can do is they can be assigned statuses in the actual NLIS database. So they can be automatic statuses. So if you're LPA accredited, it will show that in the NLIS database automatically. It can also be assigned statuses to indicate a risk, which can be from a state department, you know, Ag Victoria finding something wrong. So if, for example, if there was a biosecurity outbreak of a certain disease, PICs in that area could be flagged. If there was a specific food safety risk on that property, for example, a lead contamination or something else, that PIC can then also be flagged, so we know where the properties of risk are in the country. Really, really important. The next part of NLIS is around animal identification, which is for cattle, EID, and for sheep and goats in Victoria, it's also EID. Can apply this across all species. So livestock need to have a tag applied or an NLIS approved tag applied before they leave a PIC. And it's actually an offence under legislation to remove a device once it's applied. If it's causing a welfare issue or if it's not working or something like that, there's ways to replace them, but generally don't remove them because they need to stay with that animal for its lifetime. So if it falls out, you need a replacement tag and things of that nature, but the tag and being attached to one animal for its lifetime enables that lifetime traceability. Some more things about tags. So we talk a lot of acronyms and say a lot of things. So EID actually stands for electronic identification, which it just means that the tag can be scanned using an electronic reader or scanner. They actually contain a transponder or a microchip, which is also known as an RFID, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. They can also be assigned statuses in the NLIS database as well. So again, if they've been backstated for something, if there's a specific risk or something of that nature. So one's for cattle in particular, so that they're eligible for export to the European Union. It's a big one for market access into that country. Also that they're lifetime traceable, so that they've had movements recorded accurately throughout their lifetime. And the police or government and regulators can actually mark them as lost or stolen and help you recover them and monitor any lost or stolen livestock. So it's really useful in terms of EID over just a plain visual tag that you might put in. For cattle, colours of tags are important as well. So white if that animal's been born on the property, and then orange if it's on a property that it wasn't born on and it's lost its tag or never had one at the same time. So important for that. And for sheep and goats, we've got yellow as the universal colour for sheep that are born on that property, or the year of birth colour. So this year it's black, and then pink if it's not born on its property of birth, it gets a pink tag. So just some little reminders there. So more about EIDs because it can be a bit confusing. The EID is actually a little microchip. So got on the screen there is in that little pink piece of plastic that's actually inside the tag with the black part in the middle, which we term the female part. And that transponder is actually able to be coded by the manufacturer or the supplier that you buy those tags off. So that's a unique number called the RFID, because that number can be read using radio frequency transmission through the scanner. So that's where RFID comes into, and why you need a scanner to read that RFID number. The other part of an EID is also the visual tag number, also called the NLIS ID. So these two numbers actually work together as the identifier of that device. So we've got the RFID that's encoded in the microchip that you can read with the scanner, and then you've got the visual number that's on the outside that the manufacturer will print on the outside of the tag so you can actually read it. And those two get kind of linked together and then uploaded to the NLIS database on the PIC for the PIC who purchased those tags. So that's how the tags get in the database to start with. The visual tag will have the PIC who ordered those tags at the start of that visual number, and then also some other letters and numbers. So one for the manufacturer who made it, what type of tag it is, so depending on if it's a breeder tag or a post-breeder tag, and what species, and then the year it was manufactured or ordered as well. You can also customize the serial number on the end to suit your management practice if that's what you like to do as well. But both of those work together to create our EID system in NLIS and make sure we've got unique identification of all our animals as well. And the third part, critically, one of the equally important as the other two, is actually recording the movements of tags from PIC to PIC in the database. So legally, it's the receiver of livestock who has to do that transfer onto the database within 2 days of livestock arriving. So this is really important, especially if you're a producer buying from another producer and you're not using an agent to help you with that process. It's your responsibility to have those tags scanned and uploaded onto the database within 2 days. So if you're selling through a sale yard, the sale yard will do all the transfers. If you're selling into a feedlot, that's fine. You're selling them on, so the feedlot will transfer them off your PIC. The same if you're selling into a processor directly, they'll actually, take carriage of that and kill those animals generally off your PIC as well. So really important if you're a producer buying livestock from another producer to do those transfers. Equally important is to check as well. So just because you've sold them, you can always go in and check to make sure that those transfers off your PIC have been done as well. So just some key reminders about that. You can actually ask your agent if you're using one for a receipt number or an upload ID for the transfers off your PIC as well, just as assurance and a note that you know that it's been done, which is really critical. So now we're going to talk around why traceability is so important. So if we don't have traceability and we have something like foot and mouth disease spring up, and we don't know where our animals are and we don't know where they've been, it can just spread and spread and spread, and we haven't got a clue. So the database actually records it when someone hasn't done a transfer, because when that animal moves again, it's not listed where that movement said it was. So that's a common one in particular. We are pretty good in Australia. I think the national rate for cattle is about 95% of transfers are done properly, but it could be that 5% that undoes us. In an emergency disease outbreak, so we would actually do what's called a national standstill of livestock. So no one would be able to move livestock, which means no processing, no export. And we'd have to do a tracing exercise to find out what's sick, where has it been, what else has it been in contact, and where have they been, and what else. So you can see how it spans out of control, sort of like that COVID contact tracing that happened when there was COVID and we're trying to find out who's infected. It really spreads really fast, so we have to be on top of it and do that traceability really quickly within 48 hours. It's also really important for food safety. So if we do have beef or lamb or whatever it is in a box that goes overseas, that overseas country might test that meat, and it might ping back and say there's a chemical residue or something else that shouldn't be in there. They let us know, and we can actually trace that carton of meat back to the time frame it was processed and what properties the animal might have been from, and then basically trace it back to the property it came from, and then go and have a look at that property and see, well, what records did you actually use this chemical, et cetera, to validate that potentially the test was wrong or what's gone wrong. So really important in that regard as well, as to why traceability is so important. And that's actually a real situation. So it must be a few years ago now, but it was the one I remember, because we actually were able to prove that it wasn't a chemical the producer had used on their property. It was actually a dodgy test, but it almost shut down a access point for China. So they tested meat in China and it came back with a prohibited substance. And through our traceability system, we were able to show them, well, no, that chemical's not even used in Australia, so it mustn't be a correct test. So really important, and it does actually help us. To put it into perspective, say we've got some cattle moving from the Northern Territory into Queensland, and then we have them moving into New South Wales. That's all recorded in the database, which is really great. And then we find out that we have a disease occurrence in the Northern Territory. We're then able to see via the NLIS database that there was cattle moved from the Northern Territory into Queensland into New South Wales, and identify then what PICs or what livestock have been at those locations, and then find them and trace them. What the issue is, if livestock movements aren't recorded, is you can continue spreading the disease if the livestock movements aren't recorded. So we could potentially have movements into South Australia, say, that aren't recorded in the database, but now we have that disease down in South Australia and we won't even know about it. So that's why traceability is so important. And it's important that we do it quickly, especially when we've got diseases or things in emergency situations. Okay, so that's about NLIS. So now I'll talk about the Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA. So LPA is the on-farm assurance program covering on food safety, animal welfare and biosecurity on farm. So provides the evidence that of livestock history, and also transferring that information through the supply chain through your eNVDs. So the processor knows what's eligible to be turned into food for human consumption. I will note that LPA is actually a voluntary program, so there's no law or legislation that requires you to be LPA accredited. So small hobby farmers that aren't actually going to sell any of their animals don't need to be LPA accredited, but you do need to be LPA accredited if you want to use the LPA NVD. And it actually sets up a nice, easy framework in case you do want to sell animals, or you just want to make sure you're doing it right by, I guess, biosecurity generally within the industry. There are other alternative movement documents you can use through your state government if you don't want to be LPA accredited as well, but it's there, and it's the industry base. So the kind of 4 things that happen for LPA is accreditation. There's a process of becoming accredited for the first time and then renewing that accreditation at set timeframes. You also then have to agree and demonstrate how you meet the LPA standards, which is around 7 different elements, which I'll talk about in just a second. We've also got the use of LPA NVDs. So being accredited gives you access to do or buy and use LPA NVDs. And also there's an audit component. So we don't audit everyone in LPA every year. It's a random selection mostly, and it's about 2% of the whole producers, just to verify and validate the program's working. But if you do get selected, you have to have the audit in order to continue on in the program. LPA, as I mentioned, is on-farm assurance. So there's 7 different elements of the LPA standards which you have to meet and adhere to. So they relate to, again, overarchingly food safety, which is the top 4 there, and then livestock transactions and movements, on-farm biosecurity plans, and then animal welfare requirements. So I'll walk through each of those requirements well, now actually, but just to explain what they mean and why they're important. The first element is around food safety and minimising any contamination that's on the property from not contaminating the livestock. Generally, having a property map and a risk assessment completed is the 2 ways to tick off on this requirement, and then having a system in case animals are contaminated that you can identify them and communicate that on the NVD as well. So it's not as scary as it sounds. It doesn't have to be complicated. A map can be as mud mappy as you like, or it can be very sophisticated. It's up to you how you do it. as long as you can identify where potential risks are. And then if you do have risks on your property, it's not about getting rid of them, it's just about minimising livestock having access to them. And one way you can do that is filling out this table in our record keeping book. Once it's done, you don't need to have to keep going back to it, but it just helps set up what your risks are and how you're going to manage them. The second element in LPA is safe and responsible animal treatment. So this covers off on any type of animal drug treatment, etc., that you might give to livestock. Again, this one's all about giving the right drugs, etc., under veterinary advice, all of that stuff. But it's also around keeping good records and making sure that you've got records to back up those declarations you're making on the NVDs as well. I know there's probably not a lot of hormone use in Victoria, but if you are using hormonal growth promotants as well, you have extra requirements on you for identifying those animals and keeping records of the purchase and use of those products. Again, we have livestock treatment records templates available that you can use or modify, or if you have your own system, that's great too. But these set out basically the minimum requirements for what you need to record, and it's available in our record keeping book as well, for free, I should say. The third element is around what you feed livestock. So basically pasture or any bought-in feed, also chemicals you might apply to the property. Again, keeping records, making sure animals aren't grazing on land that's recently been sprayed or in a withhold period. It's pretty common sense stuff that you're probably already doing. It's just making sure you've got those records. So if you are bringing in feed as well, making sure it's not been sprayed with something or grain that's been fumigated or whatever it might be. And if those animals have been contaminated, again, recording that on the NVD as it goes out. So that's animal stock foods. We do have crop treatment records and introduced feed record templates if you want to use them as well. So that's all available in our record keeping book. Commodity vendor declarations, this is usually what people would have their feed supplier fill out, just to declare that there's no chemical residues on that feed, or if there are, if it is in a withhold, when that can be safely fed to the animals as well. The fourth element is around fit to load requirements or preparing livestock for dispatch. So again, the MLA fit to load guide is really good with this one, around not transporting animals that are sick, injured or unfit for the journey intended, that you've got reputable transporters, clean transports, all that common sense stuff. Keeping your LPA NVDs as well as records of what you've loaded out is also really helpful. If you don't have a copy, it's available for free on the MLA website, but it's the MLA Fit to Load guide, which actually gives you visual examples of what's fit to load and what's not. There's also truck safe programs that your transporters can be part of as well, and things like inspecting the vehicles for contamination and time off feed and water if applicable, and adhering to those curfews. The fifth element of LPA is around your NLIS and NVD requirements. So keeping records of livestock moving on and off your property is the first start. That's also so you know what's on your property, but also in the NLIS database. It also covers off identifying your livestock with NLIS devices, keeping copies of NVDs that you might receive for incoming livestock, as well as completing NPDs correctly and accurately when you're selling livestock. So that you've answered all the questions, so you've filled out all the fields, that you've signed it, that it's legible, that it's correct. And that you've got your records, so whether it be treatment history or whatever it might be, to declare onto that NVD when you're selling those animals as well. The sixth element of LPA, which was added, I think, in 2016 or 17, is biosecurity. So the requirement is to have a farm biosecurity plan documented and implement that plan. The key thing with this is it's what's reasonable and what's practical and what you're actually doing on your property. So there's no expectation for you to, complete a plan and absolutely doing everything on the template if it's not applicable to your business. There's some common sense things that are really easy to tick off. So having signs up, having access to emergency numbers if you need it, keeping an eye on your fencing, livestock monitoring. If you're introducing livestock onto your property, keeping them quarantined for a little bit to inspect them to see if they are sick, or dust off the weed seed so you're not spreading something you don't want on your property as well. Getting animal health declarations for introduced livestock is also a good way to check to see that they've either been treated or they're disease-free as well. Keeping records as best you can of people coming onto your property or leaving your property, and potentially vehicle or boot clean downs as well. So depending on what your enterprise is and what you need to do, it's any one of those things. There's also reporting. So if you suspect a disease, report it early. There's no penalties for reporting something and it not being a thing or it actually being something. You've actually probably prevented a biosecurity outbreak, if anything else. So they're really important to have to review regularly, or as things change on the property as well. We have the LPA biosecurity template. So it's in our record keeping book. It's free. You can download it off the website. You can complete it through your LPA account. You can use any template you like. So it could be the farm biosecurity one that Animal Health Australia has as well. Whatever plan works for you, as long as you've got it and you've implemented it, you'll meet the requirements, which is what you can do on your own property to really help with biosecurity. That's just an example of the biosecurity plan in the record keeping template. The last requirement in LPA is around animal welfare. So animal welfare being that you're aware of and adhering to the national standards for animal welfare in relation to whatever species it is that you have. And training people who take care of livestock would undertake husbandry practices as well is really important. So there's an LPA learning module you can do for free via your LPA account, which is the baseline in terms of understanding what the standards mean and require. So if you haven't done that, make sure you jump on and do it, as it is a part of a requirement of LPA accreditation. Record keeping, I know it can be a little bit, there's so many things to do and keep, but we've made it really easy. We actually have a book which you can get for free and print off or fill out on a computer if you're that way inclined. That has all the things in it that you need. You could use it as a base and then take what you want out of it, or adjust things, or you can use whatever format you like. So it could be spreadsheets, it could be handwritten notes, whatever it is that suits you is acceptable, which just means as long as you're keeping them and you know what you're doing with them and where you're keeping them, you'll meet the requirements. So there's absolutely no mandate to use this record keeping book, but it does have everything in it, and we get lots of feedback that it's really helpful. So if you want a copy of it, it is on our website. The last thing around LPA is audits. So first thing is, don't panic. They're not that scary. The auditors are there to help you as much as they are to check things. Your LPA records will be reviewed. So treatment records, property risk assessment, import feed, your eNVDs, things like that. As I mentioned, there's about a sample of audits that get conducted each year. So that's 3,500 at the moment. We do a mix of remote ones where you can just kind of upload some documents and have a phone call, or, you know, an auditor can actually come out to the property and do some checks and have some conversations. I always look at it as opportunities to improve either your understanding of the requirements or potentially a practice or a record keeping requirement. And it's important to note too that it is a program, and if you don't comply or you know, refuse to have an audit, or you don't close out the corrective actions that might be found, you can be suspended and removed from the program until you're ready to come back into conformity and be part of the program properly. So there are some penalties in around it, but they're far and few between, but they do happen. So it is something to be aware of. If you do have a finding at an audit, there's no need to panic as well. You get an opportunity and an adequate time to close them out. So you basically fix up whatever wasn't right, provide that evidence back to the auditor, and they close that out. So it's quite simple, and there's only ever penalties if you don't do this. So you definitely get opportunities to rectify audit findings. I will talk now about LPA NPDs and sort of how the electronic system works. So I know it's a bit out of order, but it kind of flows better for me to talk about it in this way. So LPA NVDs, I'm sure you're all familiar with completing Part A and the declaration part in terms of what livestock are moving, all the treatment histories and the questions. They bring together that food safety requirement in terms of what the processor might need to know, so that animal's, yep, I can process it and send it wherever it needs to go and be confident that it doesn't have a residue or a risk. We have paper-based books, which you can order and pay for through your LPA account. We also have for free the eNVD system, which is both web and mobile app now. So we have two ways to create eNVDs. And you can also use it to create your MSA decks and your animal health decks if you're in MSA or need an animal health deck as well. eNVDs are integrated into NLIS. So if you send an eNVD or you create an eNVD and you're sending to a processor, that eNVD is going to go straight to the processor's account in NLIS, so they can actually access that basically once you've submitted it. So it kind of speeds everything up in that regard, and to the sale yard as well. So it improves the time between them actually knowing what's coming. It actually helps us with being able to read NVDs. Not everyone has super legible handwriting all the time. Make sure that we've got accurate information and all the questions get answered. So human nature and human errors. eNVDs are accepted by the police and state government as movement records or your way bills. So we tick that off with all the states and all the police. And as I mentioned, we now have a mobile app available, not just the website. So if you've got a smartphone, it's a good one to try and download. So eNVD, especially the app, it's mobile friendly now, so you can use a smartphone if you've got one, or your tablet, or whatever it is that you might like. It makes sure that you've got the latest version of the form or the eNVD questions. You answer the questions once, not multiple times. So if you're completing an animal health deck or an MSA deck, you don't have to repeat the questions. It kind of condenses it all. You can always access them online through your LPA account. And that means if you do get audited, they're all right there in the same place. And there's no need to wait for books. So if you need an NVD and you don't have any left in your book, you can also jump online and do one pretty much immediately. You can print them off as well. So if you need to print them off still, you can print off 3 copies and away you go. And I think the biggest benefit is that it's free, so you don't have to keep paying for books, and it syncs all together, whether you're offline or online, with the eNVD as well. The app, so I'm just conscious of the time. I think we're good. We have a mobile app that works offline now as well. So you create the eNVD on your phone, and you can actually transfer it to your transporter or whoever's receiving it through a series of QR codes as well. And it actually syncs back to NLIS once you're back online and the eNVD, so it'll refreshes once you go back into connectivity as well. I do have a YouTube video, but I think we're just a little bit over time because I like to talk. We'll see how we go at the end of it for you, just about how it works, but we can share that link with you as well to watch how it all fits together. We do have time. All right, let's see if I can do this. Just give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. There's no sound, is there?
Offline with receivers or transport, the eNVD Livestock Consignments app is here, and it's built to work no matter where you are. It lets you complete and transfer consignment forms offline with receivers or transporters, and saves time with all your eNVD account information in the one place. Here's how you use it. Log into the app using your MyMLA login and tap Create and start to create a consignment from scratch. Or if you've created a template from a previous consignment that you would like to use, tap Create from Template. Select the type of livestock you're moving, complete your details or the owner's details, and complete the destination details. If you're not sure of the destination's unique property identification code or PIC, The PIC lookup feature works offline too. Be sure to check with the destination that you have the right PIC. Choose your NVD type and any extra programs that apply to your consignment. The app brings together all the questions you need to complete about the livestock for these programs. Then fill in the description of the livestock and any extra details. If you need to add multiple descriptions, just tap the plus button. When you're ready, tap Next to fill in any additional information, like details of any vaccinations provided. You'll now see a summary of your consignment information. To continue to the final declaration and transporter sections, tap Next. Complete the movement information using the date and time drop-downs, then tap Next. Your declaration information is automatically populated from your profile, but if you need to change any information, just tap on the field to change it. Tick to accept the terms and sign the declaration on screen. You'll then complete the final step of transporter's details. If you don't know your transporter details, simply add the transporter's registered MyMLA email and submit your consignment. This will allow the transporter to complete the rest of their information in the eNVD app on their own phone. If your transporter or receiver needs to access a submitted consignment offline, the Share Consignment feature generates a series of QR codes that the transporter scans on their phone to get all the consignment information. If your transporter's device is struggling to scan the QR codes, change the granularity. Doing this will break down the data into more QR codes that are easier for devices to scan and download. Then all you need to do is reopen the app when you're back in service for the data to sync, and your receiver will be able to view the submitted consignment in their system. Consignments can be created up to 4 weeks in advance, with the flexibility to change transporter details or the number of head up to the day of transport. The app automatically saves a draft, so you can always choose to finish the consignment information later on or view submitted consignments under the View tab. To get started, download the free eNVD app today. For help getting digital ready, visit integritysystems.com.au/eNVD app help.
Here we go. So that was the end of my presentation. I hope that all made sense. But Tegan, are we ready for questions?
Yep, we've got one question in the Q&A. If there's any others, put them just in the Q&A section for now. So first question, is there a fine or any penalties if they don't use electronic ID tags, particularly if they're not planning on moving their animals anywhere?
Yeah, so the legislation requires you to identify animals before they move off a property. So if you're not planning on moving them anywhere, there's no requirement to tag them. They can be tag free while they're on your property. It's only if you move them off as well. So, I mean, if they wander or get lost and they don't have a tag, potentially you're not going to get them back either. So I do believe there is some sort of penalties if you're moving livestock without tags, but not if they're not going anywhere. Is usually okay.
Great, thank you. Another question, what if the transporter refuses to give me their information, or if they run out of time or forget to do this when they're there? What can they do about that?
So there's a couple of things. So one is you could share it via email if you've got connection if you're using the app in particular. If you haven't got connectivity, it becomes a little bit trickier, but potentially the transporter needs the app to be able to take on that consignment from you if you're offline. But if you do have internet connection, you can actually email it to them, or there's other sharing mechanisms as well. So we always say it's best to check with the transporter if they need a paper copy, or if they can email it, or if they have the app that you can share it with them before they arrive, so you don't run into problem. Because if we're still in that adoption phase, they need to have that app for it to share offline as well. So
yep, great, thank you for that. Any last minute questions? Or if not, feel free to email them through to us and we can pass them on to Elizabeth. But thank you all for joining, and thank you, Elizabeth, for a great presentation. That was really insightful and helpful for everyone. So thank you. Just a reminder, if you can please fill out the survey form once I end the webinar, that would be most appreciated. Thank you, and have a great night, everyone. Thanks.